Yo, how we doing today, listeners? How we doing? How we feeling? Hopefully, y'all having a great day today. And yeah, today we're gonna be discussing the topic that typically revolves what we typically talk every day on this podcast. And what are we gonna be discussing today? You may be asking. Well, we're gonna be talking about Porter's five factors. You may be asking me, oh, what is Porter's five factors? Well, that's what we hear today. So that's why I'm here to talk to y'all about it, so y'all could get an idea of what does that even mean? Because when people say five factors, you already off the get go, you already know something. It's five. There's five of them, typically. But this is actually an important concept for y'all to understand, especially if you're getting involved with the industry and all that. And especially it happens like this is something that happens daily. So what? Let me answer that question real quick. What are Porter's five fast factors? So to give you a brief definition of that word, Porter's five factors are the characteristic of an industry environment that have the greatest impact on the performance of the firms in the industry. Um, so this is just like issues that a firm will have within an industry, and these are something that should be addressed every time, and which are addressed by most firms that compete within this industry. That's how most of them are able to manage and make sure like they don't go bankrupt or something like that, or they don't have too many financial struggles down the line. So these are definitely important within the industry. Um, so like I did mention, like most industries or most firms within the industry do address these problems, and this is actually one of the first things that they do, because before like actually addressing or like approaching the problem, they gotta identify. It's like in life, let's for an example. So let's say you have a flat tire, right? You understand, you gotta identify what tire it is, and if you can actually fix it, or where the actual flat is, or where did the nail or screw or whatever you rolled over, where did it impact that tire, so you could like understand on how you could actually approach and fix it. I know that's very like what's the word, it's a weird comparison, but I like to think it's kind of similar to a sense. So it's pretty much that's what the basics of the five factors are. But yeah, that is something that is very important, just because on a major scale, when you're a part of a major firm or you're a part of a company within an industry, you need to be able to be ready for those factors, because if you can't, you most likely won't survive. It really is like the survival of the fittest, I guess you can say. So there are five of them. I'm gonna be talking about each one of them, and I'm gonna just give you brief descriptions, and why it should be important for y'all to really focus on them. So yeah, so you can actually get an idea what it is, because like I said, most people haven't really heard of it. I known a little bit about it before, but this is I'm just trying to be straightforward with y'all and make it as simple as possible so y'all can understand. So like I said, there is five factors or forces. Either one, but most typically they're called forces, and one of them is considered new entrants or new people coming in within the industry. So why is this important to understand, or why is this a force that you should really focus on? Um, well, typically, we all know the industry is full of competition. It really is, and it has a lot of competition. There's more people trying to grow their business. Try to fit in the industry. So it is important for a firm to understand the like who's coming in within the industry, and just get an idea of what they're bringing, and what kind of competition or what kind of advantages and disadvantages they have, or what are they bringing within the industry, so you can just have it in the back of your mind that there is more people coming in. It's important to keep that in mind. Another one is supplier bargaining power. So supplier bargaining power is important, because most companies need to know, the supplier, or need to focus on the best supplier and bargain with them, and try to get a better hold of them. You get what I hope hopefully that makes sense. But typically, yeah, that's what that means. Just supplier bargaining, bargain with that, and whoever has the best supplier within an industry, typically, it really it really helps build up that company. And I didn't mention this, but trust and building trust with your supplier and building, stuff like that. Just having some trust with your supplier really does play a huge factor, because if they become loyal with that company, it makes it harder for others to try to step up and just try to bargain with them and just take what that company had away for them. So the next one we're going to be talking about is buyer bargaining power. So this is very similar to supplier bargaining power, but this is just more focused on buyers. Like I said, it really is. It's not really focused on the consumer, but who typically would. It's focused. I would like to think it does kind of focus a little bit on the consumer, but not as much as most people would think. It really is just on who would buy this product. Who is gonna be your buyer? Who's gonna be the person that typically you'll give your product to, and they'll be able to sell it to consumers. That is that similar. Like I said, it is very similar to supplier bargaining power, but this one, it really is more focused on the buyers. And like I said, this one is equally important. So I just named three of them, but all three forces important, especially when it comes to, so like, let's say the beverage industry. It's important to be able to manage and identify and adapt, or just find a way to approach this, because like I said, all industries in general are very competitive. So if a firm or company is able to manage these forces, I believe they could survive within that industry. The next one we're going to be talking about is threat of substitutions. So just off the name, it's pretty self-explanatory as to what this means. Like I said, it very is competitive, and substitutions is one of the things that will occur. So for example, let's take so we already did talk about the beverage company. Let's take a beverage like the Coca-Cola industry. So we're at the Coca-Cola industry, but they're not the only just main people. They're not the only company that provides beverages. There is an output of different other industries like Pepsi, Coke, or even Walmart, for example. They got their own great value. Just those are substitutions. Those are things that instead of consumers, focusing on Coca-Cola, they have other options. But one thing that really does play a factor, and I did mention this, is trust and loyalty, because there is a lot of consumers that are loyal to Coke. Like me personally, like I'm very a big Dr. Pepper drinker. I believe Dr. Pepper is very good, and I've tried substitutions, but they're not as good. So I believe I am very loyal when it comes to that drink. It's the same with other people. So for a firm to actually, to combat this a little bit, they do really need to focus on, or keep that in mind. There is other substitutions, which I believe most of them do have that in the back of their mind. But I like to think it really does come down to loyalty and trust within their consumers for it to be, not as big as an issue as others, but it really is something that they really do have to address and just keep in the back of their head, that there is other options out there, of course. The next one, and the final one of the forces we're going to be talking about, is how intense is the rivalry. Like, this is important as well, because like I said, there is other options out there, depending on the industry. We all know this, they're all very competitive. There are multiple options out there when it comes to drinks, beverages, whatever, toilet paper. We all seen the different brands and all that. We all seen the competition. It's very, it really doesn't take long for you to look into it to notice that, there's definitely competition. And this is important, and I like to think, because a firm needs to understand how intense is this rival, or they need to understand on how, I guess, problematic it could be, or what issues can this rivalry bring. Because sometimes there is like different drinks, of course. I keep going back to the beverage industry. There's different drinks, but some of them don't compete with Coca-Cola or Pepsi, But like a rivalry like Pepsi and Coca-Cola, we can assume they go neck to neck, because they're very huge within the industry, and I believe it's very important for those different firms to keep that in the back of their mind on how intense is this rivalry. Because if you don't understand how intense, or what they bring, or on how we could compete with that rivalry, it really can affect the firm and just cause everything to go downhill. And most firms are able to manage this, and this is why it's important to understand and identify of what they're dropping. of what is being produced, or what is the competition. I believe, it's like, I'm trying to think of an example. So an example would be, I guess, I would say, like, let's say like football. I think football. So typically when you're practicing for a football game and everything, when a player practices and everything, they be watching stuff like film, or like they get an idea of what the other team brings, to understand on how to counter that, on how to approach that rivalry, or on how they could possibly make a play, make a touchdown. It's very similar like that. It really is like a game, and whoever comes on top, or whoever is able to adapt to all these forces and all these different factors, they're able to actually score that touchdown and win. I like to think of that when it comes to these different forces. So, but yeah, those are the five. I'll repeat them one more time for y'all. New entrants. I believe I'm saying that. My bad. I have a couple notes. I wrote them down just so I don't forget. But new entrants, supplier bargaining power. We got buyer bargaining power, and we also got threat of substitutions and the intensity of rivalries. All five of them are important, and if a firm is hoping to even compete, or I guess strive within an industry, it is important for them to understand what they have to do, or figure out which force is hitting them, or which force will become an issue before actually approaching it. So most definitely, this is very important. Well, that's about it. That's all I really had for today's episode. I really appreciate y'all for stopping by. Hopefully you'll have a great rest of your day, and thank y'all for stopping by on this today's podcast.